Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to subscribe now for future content. To be featured on an upcoming video, email your true scary stories to thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I will leave a link to my email in the description box below as well. Please be sure to leave a like on this video, as it helps it perform and reach many more people. Sit back and enjoy these truly terrifying encounters with serial killers. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. When my mom was 16, she was sleeping and woke up to someone trying to open her bedroom window. She ran to my grandma's room and told her someone was trying to break in. My grandma, being the crazy awesome lady she is, grabs a bat and runs outside to confront this guy. Just starts swinging. The guy runs off and they don't think too much of it. Sometime later, my grandma sees the guy on the news, and it's Richard Ramirez. My mom told this story over and over when I was growing up. She easily could have been one of his victims. I'm so grateful she wasn't, especially since she was pregnant with me at the time. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. This happened to my mom, not me. My mom was walking home and a man drove past and asked her if she wanted a lift. My mom refused, of course, even though back then it wasn't so risky to accept lifts. He drove off and my mom forgot about it. A while later, Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, was caught. This is a guy who killed 13 women and attacked a few more over a period of 5 years. My mom recognized him as the man who had offered her a lift. Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't know if it's true, but one of my old teachers claimed she taught Jeffrey Dahmer how to speak German. She claimed he was a nice kid and a good student. I'm going to do the best I can on recollecting this event, as I was in the military when it happened. This initially happened in the late 1980s. A first cousin of mine and his friend were in a park when they saw a guy masturbating by a bridge. Being young teens, they started making fun of the guy. I believe he tried to get them to join him, but eventually he chased them and vowed if he caught them, he would kill them. They went home and told my uncle, who was probably 6'5" and fairly buff. He came back to the park and looked for the guy with them. I don't recall exactly what happened after, but the cops were called. The guy was found and charged with enticing a child and sexual assault, something along those lines. As my aunt told me in 1991, she and my uncle started getting calls from reporters. They were asking about charges against a guy in the news, if his name was familiar, and what occurred with their son. You see, my aunt, uncle, and their 3 kids live in West Allis, Wisconsin at the time. The guy, my cousin, and his friends ran into none other than Jeffrey Dahmer. My cousin ended up on an episode of the Phil Donahue Show with Tracy Edwards, the guy who was intended to be a victim but escaped, and ended up getting Dahmer caught. John Wayne Gacy. I'm from the Chicago area and my family grew up in the city. My dad's friend was offered a ride by John Gacy, but he declined, and my art teacher was in Boy Scouts with his last known victim. He even put up missing child signs and everything. Oh, and my aunts once lived down the street from Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, before he went to live in the woods. Moral of the story: stay away from Illinois. During the 1970s, I believe, when he was in his late teens or early 20s, he was walking home from work late at night in the middle of winter in Chicago. A car pulled up alongside of him and with a very distinctive voice said, "Hey, do you need a ride somewhere?" My dad replied, "No," and kept on walking. He walked a few more steps and the car pulled up next to him again, and the man inside said, "Are you sure you don't need a ride? It's really cold out and I don't mind dropping you off somewhere." My dad replied once again, "No, but thank you anyway." The car drove off and my dad didn't think much of it until a few months later when he was watching the news and heard that very distinctive voice once again. The man who offered him a ride was John Wayne Gacy, one of the most notorious, brutal serial killers of all time, killing and sexually and assaulting around 33 young men in the 1970s. When my dad heard on the news that they had caught the killer, and that it was indeed the man who offered him a ride that one night, he couldn't believe it. He had literally looked in the face of death. My mother and her ex-husband met John Wayne Gacy. Apparently, my mother's ex-husband, before my father, was a very shady character. He was on his way to becoming a junkie and was a big-time dealer. But Mom says that she isn't 100% that this story was concerning drugs. I digress. My mom's ex-husband was an all-around criminal and told Mom that they were going to collect on a debt. They get to his house and no shit, he has the basement blocked off and has concrete mix and construction everywhere. They go into his office where he sits behind his desk. The whole time Mom says he is very stereotypically trying to stall her ex, who was increasingly growing impatient with the situation. Then, John gets a phone call, and without hesitation answers it and kind of starts blowing off my mom and her ex. I should add Mom's ex was super dangerous. He was a bouncer and a bona fide ass kicker. So from the jump, Mom is worried that he is going to beat the hell out of Gacy. Gacy's on the phone looking away, and Mom's ex slowly walks up and dramatically takes the phone out of his hand, slams it on the receiver. Gacy is startled at first, but then gets this really weird look on his face, like he was trying to look crazy. He tilts his head down while looking at the ex-husband. Then without saying anything, quickly grabs his checkbook from a drawer and writes a check. They leave without incident and scene. She says after they left they were talking about how the guy gave them the creeps. How they could tell he was dangerous even though he didn't look or act like it. James the Joker Holmes. Not technically a serial killer, but a mass murderer. James Holmes did a presentation at a middle school to teach us about the brain and nervous system. He seemed really smart and he joked around really well with all of us. He was the guy that let us hold a preserved brain, if that makes sense. Yeah, would have never known there was anything wrong with him, but I only interacted with him briefly. I worked at a University of Colorado at the same time as James Holmes. I had a couple friends that worked closely with him and met him once in passing. I remember thinking when I met him that there was something definitely off about him. However, when I found out, I was still flabbergasted and terrified. We'd all like to think we would be able to tell just by meeting someone that they're a monster, but the truth is, you can't. Seemingly normal people are capable of atrocious things. I played on the same sports team as James Holmes, the Batman movie theater shooter known as the Joker. My mom would sometimes give kids rides home from practice that lived nearby. He was consistently the only one that would thank her for the ride home. He was a nice, quiet, and smart kid. Sometimes people just snap. My dad met Charles Manson in Yosemite National Park. He says there were a lot of runaways in the 1960s, so Manson was out there probably trying to find vulnerable people. Manson was walking around with a guitar and offered to sell my dad and his buddy some weed. He also told them that he sold his soul to the devil, and that any man he pointed to right then and there could be dead in a second, if my dad and his friend wanted them to be. They were a little freaked out and were very quick to get out of Yosemite entirely. My dad says that they drove for a while and saw Charles at a stop sign, and it made no sense that he could have gotten there that fast. But I'm not entirely convinced that my dad wasn't just super baked either. My father-in-law was involved in the music scene in the late 1960s and went to a party where he met Charles Manson. He said he was leaving with a friend to go get cigarettes when Charles came up and started talking to him. My father-in-law was wearing a cross around his neck, and he said Charles reached out and grabbed it, kind of twirled it around his fingers, and asked him if he knew who Jesus Christ was. Needless to say, they didn't go back after getting their cigarettes, and he said when he heard about the murders, he wasn't too surprised. Ted Bundy. My next-door neighbor's friend worked at a ski resort. There was a regular guy. He was always friendly and polite. He would make small talk with her. He was a good-looking guy, too. Made a great impression around new people. Some years later, she saw him on the news. Turned out he was Ted Bundy, and that he had abducted one of his victims in the car park of their resort. A family friend was a 20-something and lived in Seattle in the mid-1970s. She and a friend were walking home from a bar one night, and her friend had to run back to grab his wallet, so she was waiting for him on the sidewalk. She says a man in an old white VW Beetle pulled up and tried to get her to come in so he could give her a ride home. It was dark and she didn't get a good look at him, but she told me that she had a gut feeling about it and refused. Her friend walked up and the guy in the car immediately sped away. Apparently that encounter stuck out in her mind. Years later she found out about Ted Bundy. Obviously she can't prove it, but she strongly suspects that she would have been one of his earlier victims had she gotten in the car. Mark the Baseline Killer Godot. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to my mother. I'm not sure if anyone remembers, but back in 2005, there was a guy going around Phoenix killing, raping, and kidnapping a total of 35 women. At the time, my mom was a professor at ASU. The building that she was working in was under construction, and it just so happens that this guy used to work in construction. One day, as my mom was walking to her car, she noticed a guy in a construction outfit, and he had weird hair. The Baseline Killer was known to wear wigs, so he was most likely wearing a wig. Luckily, she was around 3 feet from her car when she noticed him. She told me that the smile that he gave her sent a chill down her spine. Something in her head told her to get in her car as fast as possible, lock the doors. She told me of this when she got home from work. I didn't think much of it at the time. A couple of months later, when his identity was discovered, she froze and said, "That's the guy. That's him. I remember that face." It also turns out that the killer grew up with my basketball coach, and they were best friends in high school. What a small world. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Please make sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Email your stories to the link in the description box below. Till we meet again, stay sinful.